Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second, unless you're driving. Please don't do that if you're driving. And just imagine you're standing at a crossroads.
Hmm.
To your left, you've got the absolute relentless hum of your daily life. You know exactly what that sounds like. It's the deliverables, the meetings, the metrics, the notifications pinging, every 30 seconds.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
that crushing feeling of being pulled everywhere at once. It's the modern default.
Which is, I mean, it's just exhausting. It
Yeah.
really is. It's the sound of running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up.
Incredibly exhausting. But then, okay, look to your right. Imagine there's another path, a much quieter path.
Okay.
And the strange thing is, this path isn't asking you for higher productivity. It's not about a new time management hack or another app. It's asking for something much simpler, but much harder. It's asking for presence.
It's that fundamental tension, isn't it, between doing and being. It reminds me of that distinction between, resume virtues and eulogy virtue.
I like that.
We spend all day polishing the resume, but what we really yearn for are the eulogy virtues, the things people actually say about you.
That is exactly the tension. And today, we are diving into a stack of research all centered on one single ancient Hebrew word that claims to bridge that exact gap. The word is Hineni.
Hey, Manny.
Now, if you just look at a literal translation, it seems deceptively simple. It just means, here I am.
Right.
But the sources we're unpacking today, they argue that if you treat it like a simple location update, you are missing the entire point.
You really are. If you think Hineni is just, answering roll call like a kid shouting present in class, you've completely lost the plot. The source material defines it as a posture of readiness, humility, and trust. So it's not about geography, it's about availability. It's a way of saying, I'm here, I'm listening, and I'm ready, without any idea what's about to be asked of you.
See, that's the terrifying part for me. Without knowing what is asked, that just sounds dangerous, because when I hear, here I am in that biblical context, my brain goes straight to the movies.
Oh, sure. Charlton Heston.
Exactly. Mountaintops, thunder, lightning, splitting seas, high drama. But you're telling me the sources are pointing in a totally different direction.
Completely. And that is the modern reframe these texts are pushing. We associate Hineni with the heavy
The
hitters.
big guys.
Abraham, Moses, Isaiah. The big cinematic burning bush moments. But the core argument here is that waiting for a burning bush is, well, it's a trap. It's an ego trap. The sources argue Hineni's is mainly a discipline for the ordinary, unseen, even boring moments.
So not on a mountaintop, but where then?
Standing at the kitchen sink, sitting in a Tuesday morning meeting that definitely could have been an email.
Oh, I know that one.
Stuck in traffic on the way to pick up the kids. Those moments.
Okay, so the mission for this deep dive is to figure out how this ancient idea can be like a shortcut for navigating modern chaos. We want to see if we can move from what I'd call reactive busyness, which is my baseline,
I think it's everyone's baseline.
to what the text calls intentional availability.
That's it. It's about transforming the mundane into something meaningful.
So let's start by deconstructing that shift you mentioned, from the spectacle to the mundane, because the sources do start with the heavy hitters. You've got Abraham at Mount Moriah, which is a story of just terrifying trust.
Terrifying is the right word.
You've got Moses at the burning bush, which is about reluctant leadership.
Okay.
And then Isaiah in the temple shouting, send me. I mean, these are massive, life-altering events.
They are. And because they're so massive, they
Right.
feel distant.
Exactly. They feel unrelatable. I'm not leading a nation out of Egypt. I'm trying to get my team to update a spreadsheet.
Right.
It's hard to connect the two without feeling like I'm either trivializing the ancient story or, over-dramatizing my spreadsheet.
And that disconnection is exactly what the source gets into.
Right.
It argues that because those stories are so huge, we think Hineni is only for a crisis.
Yeah, for emergencies.
But the text calls for a sacred transformation of the ordinary. It argues that your mundane tasks, answering that rude email, folding the third load of laundry, can become, and I love this phrase, laboratories of faith.
Laboratories of faith. I like that. But, let's be real. How does saying, here I am, change the fact that I'm doing dishes? The dishes are still dirty. The task is still boring.
The task hasn't changed, but the operator has. Think about a lab. It's a controlled environment where you run tests, right?
Sure.
The source suggests you view that dull task not as wasted time, but as a controlled environment to practice availability. If you can learn to be fully present in the silence of doing the dishes, you're building the muscle memory to be present when the stakes are actually high.
So it's training, like spiritual reps at the gym.
Precisely. It's training. You aren't changing what you're doing. You're changing how you show up for it. It turns a chore into an act of stewardship.
So Hineni isn't about quitting your job to go live in the desert. It's about doing the job differently.
It's the difference between responding to a colleague with frustration because they interrupted your workflow versus pausing, shifting your internal posture, and saying, even just to yourself, okay, here I am. How can I serve in this moment? It's a shift from protecting your time to stewarding your presence.
Protecting time versus stewarding presence. That's a huge distinction. But this brings us to where I think the rubber really meets the road and where this gets so much harder. Relationships.
Oh, this is the hardest part, without a doubt.
It is, because it's one thing to practice this with a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet doesn't have an ego. It's a completely different thing to practice Hineni with a person who is actively annoying you or has hurt you.
And the source anticipates this. It brings up the story of Joseph from Genesis as, like, the primary case study for interpersonal Hineni.
Right.
And we really need to look at the context, because it's a nightmare scenario.
It really is. I mean, we're talking betrayal by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, thrown in prison for years. If anyone had a right to be bitter and shut down, it was Joseph.
He had every justification for revenge. But when the script flips and he rises to power, he has his brothers, the ones who sold him, standing in front of him, begging. They don't even recognize him. He holds all the power.
He could have them executed. And honestly, no one would have blamed him.
No. But he chooses what the source calls relational Hineni. He doesn't choose revenge. He chooses availability. The key quote they reference is, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good."
That is just a staggering level of perspective. But how do we get there? I mean, most of us aren't dealing with that level of betrayal, but we are dealing with difficult coworkers or family members.
The bridge is what the source calls listening beyond preference. And this is a tough one. It means being available to listen even when it costs you your pride, your security, or just your comfort.
Listening beyond preference. I feel like most of us listen for preference. We listen until we hear something we don't like, and then click, we shut down.
Or we start planning our rebuttal.
Guilty. I'm usually drafting my closing argument while the other person is still talking.
We all do it. It's a defense mechanism. But the discipline of Hineni in conflict has these specific practices to break that cycle. The first one is suspending judgment.
Which is more than just being open-minded.
Right. It's actually an admission of your own limitation. It's saying, I know my perspective is limited. I don't see the whole picture. It's, intellectual humility.
And then there's active listening, which we hear about all the time. But the source frames it differently. It's hearing without preparing a defense.
But the one that really stood out to me, and the one I think is most actionable, is the pause.
The pause. Okay, tell me about that.
It's a split-second check-in before you speak. Something happens, a criticism, a comment, and your instinct is to snap back.
Yep.
And he requires you to insert a pause right there.
Yeah.
And you ask yourself, am I about to respond out of ego and fear, or am I responding out of availability?
That sounds so simple, but in the heat of the moment, that pause feels like an eternity. It feels dangerous.
It feels dangerous because when you pause, you drop your shield, you're vulnerable. But that micro pause is the difference between escalating a conflict and resolving it. You're creating space. You're choosing to respond instead of just reacting.
Okay, I want to pivot this to the workplace. We've talked about the worker, but what about the boss? The source talks about leadership without control.
And this is such a paradox for leaders. We're conditioned to believe that leadership is control. It's asserting authority, driving results, keeping a tight grip.
Right. If you aren't in control, you aren't leading. That's the mantra.
But the source contrasts that with Hineni leadership. Standard leadership is a closed fist. It's about grip. Hineni leadership is an open hand. It's about stewardship and trust.
And this touches on vulnerable authority. And I gotta be honest, in a corporate setting, if you talk about being vulnerable, people look at you like you're weak.
Like you're going to get eaten alive.
Exactly.
It's a common fear. But the source frames vulnerability not as weakness, but as courage. It goes back to Moses. His leadership style, he was leading this massive group of people who were constantly complaining.
I'm grateful, yeah.
Totally. A standard leader might use force or coercion to get them in line.
But Moses didn't do that.
He frequently delegated trust, and more importantly, he interceded for them. He stood in the gap. When things went wrong, he didn't blame his team. He took the heat. That's vulnerable authority. It's saying, I am responsible, not I am in control.
And Nehemiah is mentioned here too, the guy who rebuilt the wall of Jerusalem.
Right. And the text calls his approach planning with prayer. This is crucial for all the doers out there. Nehemiah didn't just sit around and pray for a wall. He planned, he organized, he gathered materials.
He was a project manager.
A great one. But he did it all while relying spiritually. It wasn't just mystical waiting, and it wasn't just secular strategy. It was both.
There's a point in the source about the metric shift that I think will really resonate or maybe trigger our listeners who feel that quarterly pressure.
This is maybe the most radical part of the leadership section. In a Hineni framework, you shift from measuring success by immediate results to measuring it by faithfulness and obedience.
Okay, unpack that. Because my boss definitely cares about immediate results. If I tell him, hey, didn't hit the numbers, but I was super faithful, I'm probably getting fired.
Of course. And the source isn't saying you stop caring about outcomes. You still play to win. But this shift relieves the anxiety of the outcome.
How so?
Because the outcome is often out of your control. You can't control the market, the client, the competition. If your self-worth is tied to that result, you will be a neurotic mess.
Yeah, I've been there.
But if you define success as, did I do my work with integrity? Did I show up with that here I am posture? Was I faithful in the process? That is something you own completely.
So it lets you lead without the paralyzing fear of failure.
Precisely. You focus on the input, which is yours, not the output, which belongs to reality.
That leads us to what I think is the hardest part. What happens when you are being faithful? You're focusing on the input. You're saying, here I am, and nothing happens.
The hidden seasons.
The source calls it the discipline of the invisible. This really struck me. It talks about the grind, the times where your effort feels totally unnoticed. And it uses an example we often gloss over, Nazareth.
Yes. We always focus on the 3 years of Jesus' public ministry, the miracles, the crowds. But the source emphasizes the 30 years before that, 30 years in Nazareth.
Doing what?
Carpentry, fixing chairs, being a neighbor. The source frames this as decades of ordinary unseen learning. I mean, think about that ratio. 30 years of obscurity for 3 years of publicity, that's 10 to 1.
That is so validating, because if you feel stuck in a career phase where you're unrecognized or you're parenting and it's just diapers and dishes and no one's giving you an award, you feel like you're failing.
You feel like you're falling behind. But the source argues you're not failing. You're in a hidden season. Those 30 years weren't a waste. They were the foundation. If you can't practice Hineni in Nazareth, you will be crushed by Jerusalem.
So if you're in a boring phase, that's not a timeout. It's the training ground.
Exactly. Look at Daniel. He's in exile, hostile territory. He keeps up this private prayer discipline, opening his windows toward Jerusalem 3 times a day.
And the source points out this wasn't for show.
No, it was Hineni in the dark. No one was watching. He wasn't getting likes for it. But that private discipline forged the character that let him have public influence later on.
The key insight here is God honors the unseen.
Yes. The argument is that character isn't forged on the stage. It's forged in the dark. The visible moments are only possible because of the invisible ones. So if you're in a hidden season, the source is saying, don't despise it, use it.
Okay, so we've got the theory, we get the mindset shift, but our listeners are practical. They want to know how. How do I actually do this tomorrow morning? The source outlines a very specific framework called the rule of availability.
And I love that they call it a rule. In monastic traditions, a rule of life isn't a list of laws to restrict you. It's a trellis.
A trellis?
Yeah, it's a structure to help the vine grow. Without the trellis, the vine just sprawls on the ground and rots.
Okay, so let's build the trellis. Step 1 is the morning commitment.
This is so simple, but so radical. Before the chaos starts, before you check your email or scroll the news, you start the day with a declaration. Here I am.
Is that just a mantra or a prayer? What is it?
It's a surrender of the schedule. You're basically saying, I have a plan for today, I have a calendar, but I am open to the interruptions, I am available. It primes your brain to look for invitations, not just tasks to execute.
Which sets up step 2, daily checkpoints or micro pauses. I like this because I can't just stop my day for an hour of meditation at 2 p.m.
Nobody can. And you don't have to. The source says to anchor these pauses to natural rhythms. You're waiting for the coffee to brew. That's a checkpoint. Walking from your car to the office. Checkpoint.
It mentions the breath prayer.
Right. Just a simple inhale and exhale where you recenter yourself. You ask, am I still available? Or have I slipped back into that reactive panic mode?
It's like resetting your posture when you realize you've been slouching at your desk.
Perfect analogy. It's a spiritual posture check.
Then we have step 3, the evening review. The source calls this the examine.
Yeah, it's an old Jesuit practice. But it's not just reviewing your to-do list. It's reviewing your presence. You ask specific questions. Where did I live, Hineni, today? Where was I available? And just as important, where did I miss it?
Where did I miss it? That's the data I probably want to avoid looking at.
It's uncomfortable, but it's such valuable data. You might notice, hey, I always check out during that 2 p.m. staff meeting. That's a pattern. Once you see the pattern, you can bring Hineni into that specific moment tomorrow.
And finally, step 4, weekly reflection.
This is just zooming out. You're looking for the trajectory. Are you generally becoming more patient, more available, or more controlling? You can't see the grass growing day by day, but you can see it week by week.
So, to recap the rule of availability: morning commitment, daily micropauses, evening review, and weekly reflection. It seems like a lot, but really you're talking about maybe 10 minutes a day total.
It's not about the time. It's about the intention. It's about weaving this thread of awareness through your day so you don't just sleepwalk through your own life.
So what does this all mean for us? We've gone from the burning bush to the coffee break. We've talked about Joseph and toxic coworkers, the grind of Nazareth.
I think if we synthesize it all, the journey is really about moving from this compulsive need for control to the freedom of availability. We spend so much energy trying to control everything.
Everything. Outcomes, perceptions.
Exactly. And Hineni suggests there's a better way. It can transform that hum of routine into a sacred encounter.
It changes the definition of a good day. A good day isn't just one where you crushed every metric. It's a day where you showed up.
That's it. And that leads to a really provocative thought the source leaves us with. It challenges the idea that this is passive or weak. Because I know some people listening are thinking, this sounds like giving up.
It sounds like rolling over.
Right. But the source argues that the call to Hineni is actually the quietest yet most courageous thing a person can do.
Why courageous?
Because it requires trusting the outcome to something bigger than yourself. It takes zero courage to follow your ego. Zero courage to react in anger or manipulate a situation. That's easy. It takes immense courage to pause, say, here I am, and trust that being faithful is enough, even when you can't see the ending.
That is a powerful place to end. So here's the question we want to leave you with as you go back to your deliverables and your routine. The source asks this: if you treated your next ordinary interaction with your barista, your spouse, your coworker as a divine appointment, how would your posture change?
That's the whole question. Not changing the interaction, just changing your posture.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.